On Sunday, December 7th, 1958, around 1 p.m., the Martin family gathered into their 1954 cream and red-colored Ford station wagon and headed towards the Columbia River Gorge. Their intention was to collect greenery from the surrounding woodlands to use for Christmas decorations around their home. 3 hours later, the family stopped at a gas station in the city of Cascade Locks, 40 miles from their home, where they ate at Paradise Snack Bar in the city of Hood River, 20 miles further from Cascade Locks. So at this point, they were about 60 miles from home. Their waitress at Paradise Snack Bar confirmed that all appeared normal with the family, and they left the restaurant around 5 p.m., which was already found weird by many, as Ken Martin was known to avoid driving at night due to his eyesight. This was the last time any sightings of the Martin family could be verified. On December 9th, Ken's boss reported him missing, as he had not shown up to work, something that was extremely out of character for him. That same night at around 11 p.m., police arrived at the home of the Martin family. There were no signs of a break-in or foul play. There were dishes still in the sink, and a load of clothing was still in the washing machine, and a Santa Claus outfit from a Christmas party was even still laid out on a bed. Wherever the Martins had gone, they clearly intended to come back. Within days, their disappearance was all over the papers, and as many as 5 different police agencies all launched separate investigations to find the family. Police were able to verify that the family stopped at the gas station and the restaurant, but after that, they were at a loss for where the family could have gone. During the course of the initial search, the police found an abandoned white Chevy near Cascade Locks, which was from Los Angeles and had been reported stolen by its owner. This led police to search for 2 ex-convicts, Roy Light and Lester Price. There was some suspicion that the two may have been involved in the disappearance of the Martins, as the owner of the Paradise Snack Bar told the police that they were at the restaurant at the same time as the Martin family, leaving shortly after the Martins, but without substantial proof to connect them to the disappearance. They were never questioned. Strangely, days after their disappearance, police would continue to get calls reporting sightings of the Martins from all over the area. Several alleged witnesses claimed to see the Martins or people matching their description in other parts of Oregon, Iowa, and even Montana, but none of these sightings could be verified. 2 witnesses claimed to see the Martin station wagon around dusk parked under the Bridge of the Gods in Cascade Locks with 2 men standing next to the vehicle and speaking to the passengers inside, though this couldn't be verified. But if it was true, this was the last known time they were seen alive. Many came to believe that they had accidentally driven into the Columbia River. Pretty soon though, a very important discovery in the investigation was made, when tire tracks were found leading to a cliff above the river, and cream-colored paint chips, consistent with the color of the Martin station wagon, were found on the rocks below. The location of the tracks suggested that an accident was unlikely, as the spot was not close to the road. Efforts to search this portion of the river though proved fruitless, when 2 police officers shot down the idea, claiming it was too dangerous and that no divers should be sent down there, even though Detective Walter Gravin was told by 2 professional divers that this would be a good place to dive, and anyone who knows how to dive would have no trouble in this area. In the early morning of May 2nd, 1959, a fisherman and his wife reported something strange floating downstream near the Bonneville Dam in the Columbia River Gorge near Portland, Oregon. To them, it appeared to be 2 bodies, and unfortunately they were right. The following day, one of the bodies was found on the north bank of the Columbia River, and the next morning, the second body was recovered. They belonged to Susan and Virginia Martin, ages 11 and 13. Though the official cause of death for both girls was determined to be drowning, a technician reportedly spotted what he believed to be bullet wounds in each of their heads and informed Dr. Waterman, the medical examiner. In his report, however, Waterman stated that no such injuries were found. Likewise, no police reports or newspaper articles from the time indicated that any signs of foul play were present. The examination also revealed that both Virginia and Susan had eaten burgers and fries within 2 hours of their deaths, consistent with the testimony of the waitress from Paradise Snack Bar. Dr. Waterman claimed to have received several threatening phone calls after the bodies had been discovered. Each time, the voice of what sounded like a young man warned Dr. Waterman that he would be harmed should any of the other missing Martins be identified. But there was actually one surviving member of the Martin family, Donald Martin. Donald had a strained relationship with his family due to him possibly being gay and having been caught with a man in the home by his parents. He never came out to aid in the search for his parents and sisters, claiming that his Aunt Charlotte had encouraged him to stay put in New York. However, Charlotte refuted this claim, stating that she didn't understand why Donald hadn't traveled to Oregon to help look for his family. Donald also didn't attend the memorial services for either of his sisters, claiming to have gotten the dates mixed up. As the only surviving family member, Donald was the sole beneficiary of the Martin estate, totaling around $36,000 at the time. 4 years earlier, Donald had been fired from his job at the Meyer and Frank, a department store in Portland. He had been fired for stealing over $2,000 worth of merchandise. One theory suggests that Donald had some involvement in the disappearance of his family, not just because of his poor relationship with his family. No, there was something much worse that came up. A .38 automatic pistol covered in blood was discovered under a rock near Cascade Locks in January 1959. A single spent bullet was found in the chamber of the gun. Bizarrely, the weapon was never processed as evidence and was later cleaned and returned to the man who found it. When investigators traced the gun's serial number, they learned it was one of the items Donald Martin was accused of stealing from Meyer and Frank back in 1954. Despite this, Donald was never outwardly accused of having any involvement in the disappearances. To this day, Ken, Barbara, and Barbie Martin's bodies remain unfound, along with their vehicle. The next case is much more modern, and follows a young girl named Kanika Jenkins. On September 8, 2007, Kanika told her mother she was going out with some friends. She lied and said they were going bowling and then to see a movie to celebrate her getting a job at a nursing home. Kanika borrowed her mother Teresa's car and left the house around 11 p.m. That was the last time Teresa saw her daughter alive. Kanika was born on May 27, 1998, in Chicago. She was a smart and responsible girl with a bright future according to friends and family, and she had a very good relationship with her mother. The night in question, Kanika and her 3 friends actually went to a party on the 9th floor of the Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois. The group could be seen entering the hotel around 1 a.m. through security footage. The friends posted videos to their Snapchat stories and Facebooks during the party, but they were clearly not having a good time, stating that the males were aggressively flirting with them even after telling them to back off. At around 1:30 a.m., Kanika sent a final text to her sister, the last time her family would ever hear from her. Around 3 a.m., the girls decided to leave the party. In the hotel lobby, Kanika realized she had left her belongings, car keys, and cell phone back in the room. Kanika's friends left her alone to go retrieve her belongings since Kanika was too intoxicated to even walk straight, but this was a terrible idea. The group returned to where they had left Kanika, and she was gone. The friends searched the hotel trying to find her, but had no luck. Between 4 and 4:30 a.m., they decided to call her mother Teresa to let her know they couldn't find her daughter. They asked if Kanika had maybe gone home without them. When they learned that she hadn't, they drove to Teresa's house and brought her back to the hotel to continue searching. Teresa didn't believe Kanika's friend's story, and she could tell that they had been drinking and were possibly under the influence of drugs. When she asked Kanika's friends if she had anything to drink, they told her that she had 1 drink. Kanika's mother grew extra worried because she knew Kanika couldn't handle alcohol, and even a single drink would be too much for her. She asked the hotel's front desk for help, but they refused. She requested to see the security footage, or for a security officer to look at it to figure out where her daughter had gone, but they told her only the police could look at the tapes. At 7:15 a.m., Teresa called 911 about her missing daughter, but at this time, the dispatcher told her that Kanika was probably passed out drunk in a random hotel room, and to go home, relax, and give it till morning. The next day, Kanika was officially reported as missing, and a police investigation began around 1:15 p.m. the next day, on September 9th. Hotel staff claimed they looked at the security footage and didn't see anything, oddly enough. You're about to hear why. Police searched the hotel and surrounding areas, but came up with nothing. Around 10 p.m., an officer decided to look back through the security tapes in case something was missed. Sure enough, he discovered Kanika stumbling around the hallways of the hotel lobby around 3:20 a.m., and she was so intoxicated that she could hardly walk. After this, the police sent out a second search team to follow her last known steps. After stumbling her way through multiple floors and hallways, Kanika found her way to a kitchen that was under renovation and not in use. The last known footage shows her walking through this kitchen back towards the freezer. This freezer had a cooler in front, with a second door leading to the freezer area. The video does not show her walking into the freezer, but it's speculated she opened the door, walked in, and never came out. Police found her frozen solid dead body inside of the freezer. Others speculate that the hotel had something to do with her death, and that her placement in the freezer is a cover-up. Some people believe she was lured into the freezer by someone working at the hotel and locked her in. Some say she was killed off camera, put in a black garbage bag, and dumped into the freezer to make it look like she stumbled into the freezer on her own. A lot of people believe the hotel might have had a motive to cover up whatever happened to her, because the party being held at the hotel was paid for using stolen credit cards, and there was underage drinking and illegal drugs inside the room. The hotel knew about the party, as they had received several noise complaints but did nothing to stop it. Was the hotel trying to hide the truth about Kanika's death so they wouldn't get in trouble for having an illegal party at their hotel? Or was her death simply an accident? Perhaps more details may come to surface one day that may give a definitive answer.
Number 6. Living Gnome. In 2008, a creepy gnome was caught on film in Argentina. Jose Alvarez, who filmed the gnome, reported that they caught the creature on film while larking about in their hometown of General Güemes, Argentina. He stated, "We were chatting about our last fishing trip. It was 1 in the morning. I began to film a bit with my mobile phone while the others were chatting and joking. Suddenly, we heard something. A weird noise as if someone was throwing stones. We looked to one side and saw that the grass was moving. To begin with, we thought it was a dog, but when we saw this gnome-like figure begin to emerge, we were really afraid." Other locals have since come forward to say that they have spotted the gnome, and the town has been covered in a pall of fear ever since the first sighting. Number 5. The Devil's Footprints. On the night of February 9th, 1855, after a light snowfall, a series of hoof-like marks appeared in the snow. These footprints, measuring 1.5 to 2.5 inches wide and 8 inches apart, continued throughout the countryside for a total of over 100 miles, and although veering at various points, for the greater part of their course followed straight lines. Houses, rivers, haystacks, and other obstacles were traveled straight over, and footprints appeared on the tops of snow-covered roofs and high walls which lay in the footprints' path, as well as leading up to and exiting various drain pipes of as small as a 4-inch diameter. There were also rumors about sightings of a devil-like figure in the Devon area during the scare. Many townspeople armed themselves and attempted to track down the beast responsible without success. Recently, on the night of March 12, 2009, more strange marks, corresponding to those left in 1855, were found again in Devon. Number 4. Jeff. In September 1931, the Irving family claimed to hear persistent scratching and rustling noises behind their farmhouse's wooden wall panels. At first, they thought it was a rat, but then the unseen creature began making different sounds, sometimes spitting like a ferret, or growling like a dog, or gurgling like a baby. The creature soon revealed an ability to speak, and introduced itself as Jeff, a mongoose. It claimed to have been born in New Delhi, India, in 1852. According to Vori, the daughter, who was the only person to see him properly, Jeff was the size of a small rat with yellowish fur and a large bushy tail. Jeff variously claimed to be an extra clever mongoose, an earthbound spirit, and a ghost in the form of a weasel. He once said, "I am a freak. I have hands and I have feet, and if you saw me, you would faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned into stone or a pillar of salt." Vori Irving, who took Jeff under her wing, died in 2005. In an interview published late in life, she claimed that Jeff was not her creation. Number 3. James Warson. On September 3rd, 1873, a man named James Warson had accepted a challenge to race in record time from the town of Leamington to the town of Coventry, a 20-mile trek. He had been boasting of his foot skills and then was asked to prove them, so, with sporting good spirits, he set about to do just that. Two friends, Hammerson Burns and Barham Wise, followed behind in a horse-drawn carriage. Burns brought along his camera. Warson was never out of their sight, and would often turn around while running to exchange some friendly words with the two riders. Running in the middle of the road, Warson suddenly appeared to stumble and pitch forward, having time enough for only one short, piercing scream. Wise later said, "It was the most ghastly sound either of us have ever heard." But as Warson pitched forward with that terrible cry, Instead of falling to the ground as he appeared to be about to have done, he completely and totally vanished in mid-fall before ever striking the ground. The road itself told the story and Wise took the pictures to prove it. There, in the soft dirt, were Warson's footprints. They led down the middle of the road, looked as if the runner stumbled, and there they disappeared. A search was called and the locals scoured the area for James. The bloodhounds used in the search were strangely reluctant to approach the spot where Warson disappeared. He was never seen or heard from again. Number 2. August 7th, 1973 will remain a day of mystery and possible tragedy. Several people in New Mexico that day, using CB radios, heard the disturbing cries for help from a little boy. He said his name was Larry, and that he was trapped in a red and white pickup truck. He was with his father, who he thinks had a heart attack and was dead. He said that they had been on a rabbit hunting trip when his father collapsed on the steering wheel. Larry claimed that the truck had flipped over into a ravine and both doors were jammed shut and he was unable to escape. The boy's signal faded in and out over the next few days, and was also heard in California, Wyoming, and Arizona. In a panic, Larry began to flip between channels crying for help. Police began a search and rescue team. One helicopter pilot who was searching the Manzano Mountains in New Mexico for Larry says that he made contact with a little boy calling for help, but he called himself David, not Larry. A family traveling from Missouri was reported missing on August 11th, and they had a son named Larry, but they were eventually found. On August 12th, an army sergeant claimed to have spoken to the boy for 3 hours, but could not get him to give more information about himself, like his phone number or address, etc. No more contacts could be made with Larry. It is presumed his battery died. The search was called off on August 13th. The police stated that there was no concrete evidence. They also say that the boy, if real, may have died sooner than the transmissions stopped, and that the subsequent transmissions from different states, some were even heard in Canada, were hoaxes. Many believe it was a hoax, but those who spoke to Larry swear to this day that it wasn't, that the emotion and the crying they heard from little Larry was no doubt the real thing. Number 1. On November 29th, 1970, a professor and his daughters were hiking in the Isdalen Valley in Norway when they came across the partially charred remains of a young woman. She was surrounded by a large quantity of sleeping pills and bottles of gasoline. All the clothing she was wearing had the tags removed and her fingerprints had been sanded off. A dental screening was done, and some of her dental work was done using techniques only found in Latin America. She was eventually traced back to 2 suitcases at the NSB train station in Bergen. Her luggage contained a prescription lotion with the doctor's name removed, and a few pieces of broken glass with partial fingerprints, and 500 German marks, which is the equivalent of $350 under the lining of one of the suitcases. They discovered the woman had traveled by train across Europe under 9 different names. There were diaries found with her things that contained cryptic notes that the police deciphered were codes listing the places that she had been. Witnesses say she wore wigs as she traveled and spoke several languages such as French, German, English, and Dutch. She stayed at several hotels in Bergen. After checking into each, she would change rooms several times, always requiring a balcony, and would always order porridge with milk for room service. A local man came to the police saying that 5 days prior to the body's discovery, he came across a very elegant woman while hiking. He noted that she wasn't dressed for being outdoors, much less on a remote hiking trail, and that her face was distorted with fear. He claimed that she attempted to mouth something to him, but was followed closely by 2 large men in black coats. The man waited 32 years to come public with this story, stating that when he contacted the police, the officer who answered told him, "Forget her, she was dispatched. The case will never be solved."
In June 2014, A 28-year-old German man named Lars Matank traveled to Varna, Bulgaria with a group of friends. They were on vacation, enjoying the beach town, the cheap drinks, and the nightlife. Lars was by all accounts a calm, quiet guy. He wasn't someone known to get into fights or cause trouble. But while out one night at a bar, Lars reportedly got into an argument with a group of local men, possibly over a football rivalry. The fight left him with a ruptured eardrum, which meant he couldn't fly home with his friends. The doctor told him he needed to stay behind and let it heal. His friends offered to stay with him, but Lars insisted they return to Germany without him. He claimed he'd be fine, he just needed a few days to rest. Alone in Bulgaria, Lars checked into a cheap hotel near the airport. What happened over the next few days remains one of Europe's most chilling disappearances. Lars began acting strangely. He called his mother several times, sounding panicked. He told her to cancel his credit cards. He said people were following him. At one point, he left the hotel in the middle of the night, claiming he was being watched by 4 mysterious men. He even texted his mom asking what the side effects of an antibiotic he'd been prescribed were. His behavior kept escalating. The hotel staff described him as nervous, pacing, and constantly checking the windows. Then, on July 8th, the day he was scheduled to fly home, Lars arrived at Varna Airport, and things took a dramatic turn. Surveillance footage from the airport shows him walking into the terminal calmly at first, but within minutes, he appears agitated. He's seen speaking to a staff member, then backing away nervously. Suddenly, without any visible trigger, Lars sprints through the terminal, dashes through the automatic doors, and runs at full speed across the airport parking lot, leaving behind his luggage, passport, and all of his belongings. The last known footage of him shows him vanishing into the trees near a construction site. No one has seen him since. His disappearance has become a breeding ground for theories. Some believe he had a psychotic break, potentially brought on by a reaction to an antibiotic he was taking, or a latent mental illness triggered by stress. Others are convinced something more sinister was happening, that Lars was genuinely being followed or targeted, and whatever he encountered in those final moments was terrifying enough to make him run into the wilderness, barefoot and defenseless. There were alleged sightings in Eastern Europe for years after, but nothing ever confirmed. The strangest part is that his mother insists that Lars was not mentally ill. She believes he was in danger, that he may have stumbled upon something he shouldn't have, or gotten involved in something darker than he realized. The image of him running, wide-eyed and desperate, has been viewed millions of times online, yet no one knows what scared him that badly, and no one knows where he went. In 1912, in the small town of Opelousas, Louisiana, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappeared while on a fishing trip with his family near Swayze Lake. His parents claimed he vanished sometime during the day, possibly while wandering near the water. A massive search was launched immediately. Hundreds of volunteers scoured the area, dragging the lake, searching the woods, and even setting off dynamite underwater in case his body was stuck in the lake bed. But Bobby was gone. The town was devastated. For 8 months, his disappearance became a local obsession. Then, in early 1913, a boy matching Bobby's description was found traveling with a man named William Walters, a traveling handyman in Mississippi. Walters claimed the boy was the son of Julia Anderson, a woman who had entrusted the child to his care, but the Dunbars were convinced the boy was Bobby. Walters was arrested for kidnapping. The authorities arranged for a reunion between the boy and Bobby's mother. At first, the boy didn't recognize her. Witnesses later claimed she hesitated, unsure if the boy was actually hers. But after spending a few days with him, she announced to the press and the police that he was, in fact, her son. Case closed, the newspaper said. Bobby Dunbar had been found, Walters was sentenced to prison, the boy was returned to the Dunbar family and raised as their own. But there was a problem. Julia Anderson, the woman who had entrusted the boy to Walters, showed up. She insisted that was her son, Bruce, and that the Dunbars had taken him. She had no money, no lawyer, and no support. When the courts ruled in favor of the Dunbars, she lost custody forever. She returned to Mississippi heartbroken, labeled a liar and an unfit mother by the press. For decades, Bobby Dunbar lived under that name, unaware of any of this. But in the early 2000s, Bobby's grandson began investigating the family's history. Something didn't sit right. Eventually, the family agreed to a DNA test comparing Bobby's descendants to those of the Dunbars. The results shattered a century of belief. The boy who had grown up as Bobby Dunbar was not biologically related to the Dunbars. He was Bruce Anderson. Julia Anderson had been telling the truth all along, which means the real Bobby Dunbar was never found. To this day, no one knows what actually happened to him. Whether he drowned, was abducted, or suffered some unknown fate, his case remains officially unresolved. Meanwhile, an innocent man was imprisoned, and another family raised a child who wasn't theirs, all because the truth was too painful, and the need for closure outweighed the facts. In 1928, 9-year-old Walter Collins disappeared from his home in Los Angeles. His mother, Christine Collins, had given him a few coins to go see a movie while she was working. He never came home. Christine went to the police, who launched a search. His case quickly made headlines. This was during a time of rising fears about crime and child abductions, and public pressure on the LAPD was intense. For 5 months, Christine kept the search alive. She printed flyers, organized searches, gave interviews. Then, in August, police in Illinois picked up a boy who claimed to be Walter. He was brought to Los Angeles to be reunited with Christine in front of reporters. But as the cameras flashed and police beamed with pride, thinking they had solved the case, when Christine saw the boy, she said, "That's not my son." The police told her she was wrong. They insisted he had changed from the trauma. They encouraged her to take him home on a trial basis. Christine reluctantly agreed, likely pressured by the public scene. But after just 3 weeks, she returned to the LAPD and again said, "This is not my son." This time, the police had her committed to a psychiatric hospital, claiming she was hysterical and refusing to accept reality. Meanwhile, the boy admitted that he wasn't Walter. His real name was Arthur Hutchins, a runaway who had been pretending to be Walter Collins to get a free trip to California. He thought it might help him to meet his favorite actors. So that meant the police had publicly reunited a grieving mother with a random child, and then punished her when she didn't go along with the lie. That should have been the end of the story, but it gets darker. Around the same time, a Canadian man named Gordon Northcott was arrested for a string of murders on a chicken farm in Wineville, California. He had lured young boys to his property, imprisoned them, and eventually killed them. When authorities raided the farm, they found evidence linking Northcott to multiple victims. One of those victims they believed was Walter Collins. Christine pleaded for answers, but Northcott never gave a clear confession. He was convicted for other murders, but the fate of Walter Collins remained unresolved. Christine spent the rest of her life trying to find out what happened. She never gave up, and the city of Los Angeles never formally apologized for what they did to her, for locking her away when she refused to accept a lie. The story later inspired the film Changeling with Angelina Jolie, but the real horror is how it actually happened. A grieving mother gaslit by the system, a lost child exploited for headlines, and a police force more interested in good press than truth. In August of 2008, a 24-year-old Canadian woman named Kayla Reed vanished from a small town in British Columbia. She had recently moved back in with her parents after going through a rough breakup and was trying to start over. One evening, she told her mother she was going to meet a friend at a coffee shop nearby. She left around 7:30 p.m. wearing a light hoodie and jeans, carrying her phone but no purse. She never showed up for that meeting. Her phone went dark less than an hour later. What followed was an immediate and massive local search. Flyers went up and volunteers swarmed the forested areas around town. Search dogs found nothing, and there was no sign of foul play. No dropped phone, no torn clothing, no surveillance footage. It seemed Kayla had completely vanished. As expected, her parents were devastated. Kayla was described as responsible and grounded, not the kind of person to run off without telling anyone. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Eventually, the case went cold. But then, a full year later, something happened. Kayla showed up. In the early morning hours of July 5th, 2009, she walked into a hospital nearly 200 miles from where she disappeared. She was disoriented, dehydrated, and barefoot. She was also noticeably thinner, sunburned, and wearing clothes that didn't belong to her. She refused to speak to doctors. She simply wrote her name down on a piece of paper. The hospital staff called police, and after fingerprint confirmation, it was officially her. She had been missing for 11 months. Her parents, of course, rushed to see her, but even then, Kayla said almost nothing. She stared at them blankly, occasionally smiling, but she didn't hug them. When they asked where she had been, she said only, "I was in the dark. I was safe, but it wasn't me." Authorities were baffled. She had no visible injuries or signs of abuse. Toxicology came back clean. She had no head trauma, no signs of having been drugged long-term, no tattoos or branding or anything that would suggest organized abduction. She spent a week in the hospital under psychiatric observation, and then she was quietly released to her family. No charges were filed and no statements were ever made. Kayla never spoke publicly about where she had been. She deleted all her social media accounts and moved away within a year. Reporters tried to follow up, but her family refused all interviews. The case was officially closed, a missing person who returned, but no one ever got the answers they were looking for. Just a young woman who came back from somewhere completely changed. She wasn't hurt or injured, but she was different. One nurse from the hospital said that in her last shift before Kayla was discharged, the girl looked her dead in the eyes and whispered, "Don't go into the woods alone, they find you there." No one knows what she meant, but no one who worked that case ever forgot it. In October 2017, in the city of Santa Rosa, California, a 15-year-old high school student named Connor Hastings disappeared while walking home from school. He took the same route every day, a suburban street surrounded by homes and parks, but one afternoon he didn't show up. His mom called him, but there was no answer. When she checked with friends, no one had seen him since he left school. By 7 p.m., police were notified and a search began immediately. His backpack was found a day later, dumped behind a dumpster a few blocks from his usual route, but his phone was gone. For weeks, the case dominated local headlines. Police dogs tracked a scent trail that ended suddenly at the edge of a wooded trail, where it seemed to just stop. It was strange because no tire tracks were left behind, and there were zero witnesses. When detectives questioned classmates, rumors began spreading. Some kids claimed Connor had been acting paranoid in the days just before he went missing, like he was jumping at noises and asking people if they'd seen the man in the red jacket. One friend said Connor had recently asked about how to tell if you're being watched. The trail went cold, but 5 minutes later, in March of 2018, Connor returned, or rather, he was found. A 911 call came in from a payphone, one of the few still operating in the area, and the caller reported a teenage boy sitting on a bench, unresponsive, outside a small-town library 60 miles away. When police found Connor, he was silent and staring ahead. His hair was much longer than when he'd last been seen, and his clothes were filthy. He had a spiral-bound notebook clutched in both hands, but it was completely blank. He wouldn't speak for over 24 hours. When his parents arrived, he hugged his mother tightly and then burst into tears. But even then, he said very little about where he had been. Over the next few days, he opened up only slightly. He claimed he had been taken by a group, but couldn't describe their faces. He said they kept him somewhere without clocks, somewhere cold. When police asked how he escaped, he said, "They just let me go. I think I passed their test." A month later, he gave one final statement before refusing to speak publicly again. He said, "There were others. I heard them. I wasn't the only one, but I might be the only one they gave back." The notebook he had been holding the night he was found remained empty. No one could get him to write anything in it, but on the final page in the bottom corner, written in shaky pen, were 4 words: "I was not alone." Police never identified any suspects. The FBI reviewed the case, but released no findings. Connor eventually changed schools and now lives under a different name. To this day, his case is officially solved because he came back, but nobody really believes that that's the end of the story. On the night of February 9th, 2004, a 21-year-old nursing student named Maura Murray vanished after a minor car crash on a remote stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Nearly 2 decades later, no one knows where she went, what she was running from, or who might have been waiting for her. Earlier that day, Maura left her dorm at UMass Amherst after sending emails to her professors, telling them there had been a death in the family and she'd be gone for a few days, but no one in her family had died. In fact, no one in her life was planning to leave. She packed a bag, withdrew nearly all the money from her bank account, and bought a few items, including alcohol from a nearby store. Then she drove north into the White Mountains, a alone and quietly, without a clear destination. At approximately 7:27 p.m., a local woman called 911 to report a car accident outside her house. A small black Saturn had crashed into a snowbank on a sharp turn. When police arrived 20 minutes later, they found the vehicle, but no sign of the driver. The car was locked and the windshield was cracked. Both airbags had deployed. A box of wine was spilled across the interior. The only thing missing was Maura. A bus driver who lived nearby had seen her just minutes before police arrived. He stopped and spoke to her through the window. She looked cold and shaken but declined help. He drove off and called in the accident, but by the time the officers reached the scene, Maura had vanished. Not just walked away, vanished. Police dogs tracked her scent for about 100 yards up the road, then it stopped abruptly. No footprints in the woods or any belongings left behind. It was like someone picked her up in a car just out of view. Her phone and credit cards were never used again. The bottles of alcohol she had bought, some were gone and some remained in the car. There were no obvious signs of foul play, but nothing added up. She had no history of mental illness. Friends and family said she wasn't suicidal. She was planning for the future. And yet, she was gone. In the years that followed, her case became one of the most obsessively followed mysteries on the internet. Armchair detectives, forums, and podcasters picked apart every detail. Some believed she staged her disappearance to start a new life. Others believed she was abducted by a stranger or someone she arranged to meet. Then there are darker theories. A serial predator operating in the mountains, or a cover-up. But nothing concrete ever came, and her body was never found. Something obviously happened to Maura Murray that night. Something that was likely deliberate. And to this day, the forest around Route 112 still holds its secrets. And the most chilling part is if she was taken, whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing and never made a single mistake. In the remote town of Nome, Alaska, a place isolated by hundreds of miles of tundra, accessible mostly by air, people are used to strange things happening. The winters are long and brutal, and the nights seem endless, but even there, among the quiet snow-covered streets and howling wind, the disappearance of Rick Hills in 2004 is something people still whisper about. Not because it was the only one, but because of how it happened and what was left behind. Rick Hills was a 37-year-old electrician. Hardworking, quiet, not particularly social, but he was well liked by the people who knew him. He lived alone in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, near the edge of the wilderness. It was not unusual in Nome to be that isolated. Many people preferred it, but Rick's case became more disturbing when it was discovered he wasn't the first one to go missing from that area. In fact, in the 10 years before he vanished, over 20 people had disappeared from Nome under similarly strange circumstances. The FBI would eventually investigate it as a pattern, but Rick's story was different, more personal and terrifying. On November 13, 2004, Rick failed to show up for work. His boss called him repeatedly, to no avail. That evening, a coworker drove to Rick's cabin. His truck was there and the lights were off. It had snowed lightly that afternoon, but when they got closer, they noticed something strange. No footprints in or out of the cabin. It was like Rick had never left or returned. The coworker knocked, but there was no response, so he walked around the property and saw that the back door was open. He called out and stepped inside. The place was undisturbed. The coffee pot was full and his cell phone was on the table, but there was no sign of Rick himself. The weirdest part was the bed was made, not like someone had just gotten out of it. The weird part was that the bed was made so neatly, it looked as though no one had ever been in it. The coworker called the police and they searched the home. Then they searched the surrounding area and then the woods. They brought dogs, drones, helicopters, and still found nothing. Even with the light snowfall, there should have been some sign of direction, like a trail or blood or something, but there was no trace. The man walked out of his cabin with no coat, no boots, no keys, and simply just disappeared. The investigation didn't find foul play. He reportedly had no enemies or debts. Even his bank account was untouched, and his phone had not pinged a tower since the day before. But then, 2 days later, something happened that the public wasn't told about until years later. A hiker about 30 miles north of Nome found something bizarre. A man's sock frozen into the mud of a game trail. Nearby, hidden under a thin layer of snow, was an old Polaroid photograph. It was dirty and crumpled, and its image nearly destroyed by the cold. but the outline was clear. It was Rick's cabin, shot from the woods. The angle showed the living room window, and in the reflection was a face, but it wasn't Rick's. The photo was turned over to the police, but they never released it to the public. Years later, an officer who worked the case anonymously told a local journalist that it was the most disturbing thing he'd ever seen in his career, that the face in the reflection didn't look entirely human. He described it as off, like distorted, pale, the eyes too wide, and the mouth slightly open, as if it had been caught mid-whisper, like someone caught staring who didn't expect to be seen, as he described it. The area was searched again, but nothing was found, and no further signs of Rick. Locals started calling it the Watcher, saying something in the woods had been taking people. The disappearances dated back decades. Natives had legends about the Dark Man, a thing that lived between the trees and came out at night. When the FBI eventually got involved, they said the disappearances were likely due to weather, accidents, and alcohol. But not Rick. People close to the case knew better. They knew it wasn't weather and it wasn't a misadventure. Rick was used to those woods. He wouldn't have wandered out barefoot without a jacket in sub-zero temperatures. He would not have left his door open, and he wouldn't have vanished without a single track in the snow. To this day, Rick Hills has never been found. Some say it was just a tragic accident. Others say Rick saw something he shouldn't have, something that was watching him. Halloween is the one night of the year where being scared is supposed to be good fun. However, amid all the harmless activities like trick-or-treating, sometimes genuinely frightening and disturbing things can happen. This includes some horrific murders and unexplained disappearances, which are far more terrifying than any haunted houses or corn mazes. These are 8 unsolved mysteries and disappearances that happened on Halloween. In 2015, 24-year-old Michael Miller and his friends were hosting a Halloween party in the house that they rented together on Halloween night. Michael says they invited around 40 people and told their friends to bring friends, and the crowd that came was actually around 40 people. At Halloween parties, typically people's costumes don't cover their faces unless part of the costume involves a mask or a face covering. But even when a costume will include a mask, usually at least at some point at a party it would be expected for the wearer to take it off just to let their face breathe for a little bit. That's why Michael and his housemates were suspicious when there was one guy in basically regular clothes, but who was wearing a gruesome-looking Halloween mask referred to as an Elephant Man mask. He was sitting in a chair just seemingly doing nothing, making some of the guests confused and uncomfortable. Nobody knew who it was, so Michael eventually went up to the guy and asked who it was, to which the man replied Billy in a deep voice. Michael said he didn't know any Billy, and asked him to remove his mask for a second. The man refused, so Michael asked the man to leave, and he did. At this same party, 2 girls fell unconscious, likely to being slipped Rufalin, and that man was suspected to be the culprit. Even more, that same Saturday night, 2 neighboring houses were broken into and robbed. That masked man was never identified, and while it's not 100% certain that he was responsible for slipping something in anybody's drinks or for the nearby break-ins, it would be a fairly safe assumption. Cindy Sung was a 21-year-old South Korean student attending Penn State University. In 2001, she dressed up in a bunny costume and attended a Halloween party at a nightclub near the college. She stayed at the club until around 2 a.m., then left for her friend's apartment where she spent the next few hours hanging out with her friends. She was then dropped off at her apartment at 4 a.m., and this was the last anybody ever saw of her. After Cindy was reported missing, a search of her apartment yielded no signs of a struggle or foul play. Police knew she had made it inside because her fake eyelashes and the backpack that she'd worn to the party were found inside the apartment, as well as her cell phone. The only things missing were her purse and wallet, suggesting that she'd possibly went out again. Her credit card showed no activity after her disappearance, and neither the authorities nor her family believed that she vanished willingly. However, after her disappearance, a witness reported seeing a man resembling Cindy in the Chinatown district of Philadelphia. She was inside a vehicle with an unidentified male and appeared to be crying for help. In 2003, a man named Hugo Marcus Selinsky was arrested after the remains of 5 people were found buried in his backyard. Selinsky told police that he and another man, Michael Kurkowski Jr., abducted Cindy off the street and kept her imprisoned in his walk-in safe until she perished, and then buried her on the property. However, none of the remains discovered could be identified as Cindy, and the only person who could confirm this was Kurkowski, but his body was one of the many buried on Selinsky's land. The case remains open to this day, and no evidence exists to link Selinsky. On Halloween night in 2002, 21-year-old University of Minnesota student Chris Jenkins and some of his friends visited a keg party before going to a place called the Lone Tree Bar and Grill. The bar was in downtown Minneapolis, where Chris was attending school. The group arrived around 10:30 p.m. But around an hour and a half later, Chris was removed from the bar by security for reportedly being too drunk, and he was banned from returning. Chris was left out in the cold. It was as low as 20 degrees Fahrenheit that night, and he was only wearing his costume, which consisted of Native American attire, and he was without his wallet, cell phone, or keys. From this point, he vanished without a trace. The area around the bar he was kicked out from was not considered safe, with a very high crime rate, and it was definitely not an ideal place to be roaming around at night alone and intoxicated. When no word was heard from Chris, his family hired a private investigator who was later told by witnesses that on that same night that Chris went missing, a large group of men attacked a lone person, presumed to be some kind of gang initiation, just across the street from the bar where Chris was last seen. If that wasn't enough concerning news for the family, 2 scent tracking dogs on separate days picked up Chris's trail on the sidewalk where the attack was alleged to have taken place and followed it to the same spot inside the parking garage next door, where a few drops of blood and a single red feather were found. A feather that clearly belonged to the costume Chris was wearing. Strangely, that's where the trail ended. Chris wasn't found until 4 months later, when his body was found floating in the Mississippi River, a victim of what was originally believed to be either a suicide or an accidental drowning. But further investigation caused the medical examiner to change the official cause of death from accidental drowning to homicide. This one was sent to me back in 2015. In 2007, a 12-year-old boy named Bradley was trick-or-treating with a group of friends in Colorado. The boys who were with Bradley early on in the night said that they were just going along with their trick-or-treating when one of the boys picked up on the fact that Bradley was missing. They retraced their steps in an attempt to find him and disturbingly found his cowboy hat sitting by the curb. Bradley was dressed in a homemade cowboy costume that day. A little ways up the road, Bradley's bag of candy was found as well, spilled out onto the street, almost leaving a trail. That was the last of Bradley's possessions that were found by the boys that night. It's unknown how Bradley disappeared without anyone noticing, but the most likely explanation would have to be that Bradley at some point wandered off on his own, leaving him vulnerable to predators on their favorite night of the year. But the only thing that may take away some credibility of that possibility would be the fact that a week later, Bradley's mother found his glasses in the backyard. The strange part was that Bradley's friends all said he was wearing glasses the last time they saw him, indicating he may have went back home in between the period that he went missing. No information was followed up with since. David Stone was a successful stock market analyst, making good money and a stable career, described by friends and family as a bright, sharp young man. However, a few days before Halloween of 1988, he left his home during a Halloween party when a heated argument with a party guest turned violent. This was strange because anyone close to him would say he's the least violent person they knew. A few people reported seeing David sitting next to his car on a highway, until he apparently set off on foot into the desert. He was spotted by witnesses several times that day, including a farmer who found him wandering around on his property severely underdressed for the cold weather. He was apparently muttering something about being in search of the beast before vanishing for good. He was last seen on Halloween Day. His car was found on November 5th off the same highway. Search teams headed north from the location of the car and found 2 pyramids made out of rocks and surrounded by a triangle, with David's Rolex lying next to one of them. 3 miles further north, they found a Fibonacci sequence, which is a number pattern used in stock analysis, etched into the soil. Bloodhounds were able to track David's scent along the highway 13 miles north from where his car was abandoned, but the trail went cold. His family found a riddle-like note inside his vehicle that read, "They think the word is in the safe. 6 knives in Rob's room. Use buy your tea and use take your chances, Halloween." Use buy your teas and take your chances is a play on an old saying about stocks and gambling, and in the New Age movement, having 6 knives in your house would mean a regretful yet necessary rite of passage. 2 hikers found David Stone's remains in the desert in 1992, 4 years after he went missing. Despite having no idea what caused his erratic behavior or how and why he died, there was no sign of any foul play. In 1981, a Manhattan couple named Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman were murdered in their Greenwich Village apartment in the late hours of the night. The 2 were brutally beaten before being shot in the head, and the apartment was completely ransacked. Sisman, the boyfriend, was allegedly involved in drugs, so it was initially thought that that may have been a possible motive for the killings. However, the case took a bizarre turn when a prison informant claimed that one of his fellow inmates had somehow predicted the crimes weeks before it actually happened. That inmate was the son of Sam killer David Berkowitz, an American serial killer who pleaded guilty to 8 shootings that began in New York in 1976. There's even speculation that Berkowitz was involved with a satanic cult and didn't commit all those murders on his own. According to the informant, Berkowitz told him that his alleged cult was planning to break into an apartment in Greenwich Village on Halloween night and perform a ritual murder by shooting a couple in the head before ransacking the place to remove incriminating evidence. This description matched exactly what went down in their apartment. When questioned, Berkowitz claimed that Ronald Sisman possessed snuff footage of one of the Son of Sam shootings and was planning to hand it over to the authorities to avoid some drug charges. But to this day, no evidence was found to support Berkowitz's claims. Therefore, no one knows if the murders of Ronald and Elizabeth had anything to do with the Son of Sam case. It was Halloween night of 1996 when 40-year-old Veronica Safransky of Argyle, Minnesota went missing. Veronica attended a Halloween costume party with a friend at Mick's Bar and Grill in Warren, Minnesota a few nights before Halloween. Veronica's friend was unable to locate her inside the bar around midnight. However, witnesses told authorities that Veronica was seen with a man named Kevin Skirvin leaving the bar together. They left the venue in his black pickup truck with Oregon license plates. This was the last moment Veronica was seen. She was reported as a missing person later the next day. And later that year, a belt believed to be part of her costume was found along a country road not far away. An extensive search of the area didn't yield any evidence as to where she could be. Kevin Skirvin, the man she was seen leaving the bar with, had a history of sexual assault convictions, and he admitted to departing Mick's Bar and Grill with Veronica, but claimed that he did not know what happened to her afterwards. He had never been charged in connection with her disappearance. Authorities have said that there are many wooded areas in Marshall County where Veronica's remains could be easily concealed. In fact, at the start of each hunting season, the sheriff asks local hunters to be on the lookout when traversing the wooded lands, as her body has still yet to be located. Her case remains unsolved. On Halloween in 1955, Marilyn DeMond took her 2-year-old son Stephen and 7-month-old daughter Pamela to a bakery in East Meadow, New York. While she was inside the bakery, Marilyn irresponsibly left Stephen and his sister, who was inside a carriage, to wait outside the front. When she left the bakery 10 minutes later, she was mortified to discover that both Stephen and the carriage were gone. Shortly thereafter, the carriage with Pamela still inside was discovered about 1.5 blocks away. However, Stephen was nowhere to be found. He has not been seen since. In many cases where infants are abducted, it's theorized that the perpetrator wanted a child of their own and decided to raise the missing infant under a new name. Over the years, DNA testing has been utilized in an attempt to determine if Stephen DeMond was ever given a new identity. At one point, investigators noticed that Stephen bore a resemblance to the infamous boy in the box, an unidentified child who was found murdered inside a cardboard box in Philadelphia in 1957. However, after DNA testing, all indications were that the boy in the box was not Stephen DeMond. In 2009, a Michigan man named John Barnes came forward, believing he might be Stephen, but some DNA testing also ruled this out. It's possible that an adult Stephen DeMond might be living another life somewhere under a different identity, unaware that he was once taken from his real family. It may also be a possibility that Stephen was murdered long ago, and his body was never found. Either way, his current whereabouts, dead or alive, continue to remain unknown, and at this point, will probably never be known. West Bengal, India has its fair share of allegedly haunted places, but perhaps none are as creepy or as intriguing as the Aliyah ghost lights. In the swampy marshes of West Bengal, there have been many sightings of these lights called Aliyah or jack-o'-lantern. They're described to be a flickering ball of light that emerges usually in the marshy regions of West Bengal and Bangladesh, and they've been attributed to being the cause of death of many fishermen. The fishermen community of the area have often spotted these unexplainable lights, and many believe that some of the fishermen were so transfixed after seeing the Aliyah light that they followed it and drowned. It's also believed by many in the area that these lights are the spirits of dead fishermen who lost their lives fishing in the marshes. These lights at times confuse the fishermen, causing them to fall in the water and drown, but also at other times, they may help guide them and prevent them from getting into danger. At least that's what locals believe. Aliyah ghost lights are not just limited to West Bengal though. They have been spotted in various places around the world, and these lights have long been associated with the paranormal or spirits. Some good spirits, some bad spirits. It's said that once you follow one of these lights, they'll flicker and diminish in size until they disappear, often causing people to panic and get lost. People have seen these lights all around the world in graveyards, swamps, and boglands, and they have been referred to as many different names. Anaya Carr from Siliguri was on the phone with her husband who was on a solo fishing trip, and when he had mentioned seeing a bright light glimmering across the marsh, he stopped replying, though the call didn't end right away. Anaya would keep saying her husband's name into the phone until it sounded like the phone was dropped, and then the call abruptly ended. Her husband was never seen again. In 2014, taxi drivers in Ibadan, Nigeria were starting to disappear, and while there was no outward evidence of any sort of foul play at first, people started to become suspicious when more and more people would disappear and mysterious-looking strangers would be lurking the area. Police were notified of the disappearances, but reportedly were uncooperative, refusing to investigate further and saying that the men had likely just run off. As the disappearances continued in the area, there was still no official response until a motorcyclist riding down a highway claimed that he had heard some crying out for help from the forest. On March 22, 2014, police finally went about investigating the forest, where they would stumble across a literal house of horrors. There, tucked away in the trees, was a seemingly abandoned building from which emanated a vile stench. Upon entering the building, they were met with countless decomposed human corpses, most of which had been bound with chains. As the search of the place continued, police began turning up other human remains in the surrounding area, many of them having been butchered and missing limbs, some of them even still bound with chains. There were also numerous human remains found scattered in the surrounding woods, stuffed within bushes, in the nooks of trees, or dumped into holes in the ground or into caves. The corpses and remains were in various states of decomposition, many of them missing limbs or internal organs. In total, over 20 decomposed human bodies and hundreds of human skulls were found in the forest, and there was a separate building full of only personal belongings of the victims, including licenses, clothing, and even children's toys. 15 people were rescued who were chained up in captivity, all severely malnourished. When police interviewed them, in most cases they could not identify the people who had taken them, but they described that they had been kidnapped, tortured, and kept in shackles with once-a-week feedings. However, a few claimed that the men who kidnapped them had been government officials, or at least were posing as them. The answers as to what exactly happened here have not been made completely clear, and it's unknown who took these people or where they went, and while some arrests were made, no one has been officially charged with any of it. On January 2, 2000, Zeb Wayne Quinn went missing in Asheville, North Carolina. Zeb was 18 years old and working at a local Walmart in the electronics section when he disappeared after finishing his shift. At around 9 p.m., he had plans to travel a moderate distance with his coworker Robert Jason Owens to buy a new car. Zeb met Robert in the Walmart parking lot before they drove separately to look at the vehicle. The two men were seen on surveillance footage at a nearby gas station at approximately 9:15 p.m. purchasing sodas at a convenience store. According to Robert, after leaving the gas station, Zeb signaled for him to pull over by flashing his headlights. Zeb told him that he had received a page and needed to return the call. After he returned from using a payphone, Robert described Zeb as frantic and nervous. Zeb told him that he needed to cancel their plans to view the car, and he eventually sped off, rear-ending Robert's truck in the process. Hours later, Robert was treated at a hospital for fractured ribs and a head injury that he claimed was due to a second car accident that same evening. No accident report was ever filed with police. The following afternoon, Zeb's mother Denise filed a missing persons report. 2 days after he was last seen, a man claiming to be Zeb placed a phone call to the Walmart where he worked. The man told Zeb's coworker that he would not be coming to work due to coming down with a fever, but the coworker recognized that the voice was not Zeb's. The phone call was placed back to a Volvo plant where Robert worked. When questioned, Robert admitted to making the phone call, claiming that he was doing Zeb a favor after he called and asked Robert to call in sick for him. During police investigations, a woman named Misty Taylor was interviewed, as she and Zeb had become romantically involved in the weeks prior to his disappearance, and he had told friends and family that he had been threatened by her abusive boyfriend Wesley Smith after he discovered that the two of them had been speaking. On January 6, 2000, Zeb's mom received a phone call from a former classmate of her son, who happened to be a coworker at the Asheville hospital where both were nurses, who told her that she had seen his car in the parking lot of a barbecue restaurant next to the hospital. Police examined the car, which had been left with its headlights on, but there was also a pair of lips and an exclamation mark drawn on the car's back windshield in lipstick, and a live puppy was found inside. A plastic hotel keycard was also discovered in the vehicle, but police couldn't find the source hotel. There was also a jacket that didn't belong to Zeb in the car. Police collected forensic evidence from the car, but uncovered no new leads. Zeb's mother believes that the car was placed there by somebody that knew that his family worked and lived nearby, intending that one of them would find it. A couple later called police to report that they had seen Zeb's car being driven in downtown Asheville before it was parked at the restaurant, and assisted police in producing a composite image of the person driving the car. Police later noted that the sketch looked identical to Misty Taylor. Robert Jason Owens was arrested in 2017 for the murder of Zeb. However, in his plea agreement in July of 2022, just last month, Robert's story went that his uncle Gene, who died in 2017, knew Misty Taylor's aggressive boyfriend and was asked to do something to keep Zeb away from her, and Robert said his uncle's remedy was murder, though he said that he played no part and only witnessed it. The judge accepted Robert's plea and sentenced him to 150 to 189 months in prison, which will be served concurrent to his 60 to 75-year sentence he's currently serving for the murder of a couple in 2015, which is an entirely different story of its own. Regarding Zeb's murder, no one can really know for sure what actually happened. On July 13, 2011, Rebecca Zahau was found hanging at the Spreckles Mansion in Coronado, California, and she was pronounced dead by first responders called to the residence. Rebecca's body was found nude, bound, and gagged. Her death occurred 2 days after 6-year-old Max Shackney, the son of her boyfriend Jonah Shackney, had fallen from the staircase of the mansion and was held in a hospital in critical condition. Rebecca and her younger sister Zena were the only people present at the time of Max's fall. On July 16, 2011, Max succumbed to his injuries and died in the hospital. Rebecca's death was ruled a suicide, but her sisters don't buy it and have long pressed their point, waging battles both with authorities and possible suspects. On July 12, 2011, Rebecca dropped off Zena at the airport for her flight back to Missouri, and then picked up Jonah's brother Adam, who had just arrived on a flight from Memphis, Tennessee. Rebecca, Jonah, and Adam ate dinner with a friend named Howard that evening. Afterwards, Rebecca and Adam returned to the Spreckles mansion, while Jonah held a vigil for Max with the child's mother, Dina Romano. There were reports of loud music coming from the Spreckles mansion later that night. On the morning of July 13th at around 6:45 a.m., Adam stated that he found Rebecca's nude body hanging from a balcony, with her wrists and ankles bound and her hands behind her back. He called 911 at 6:48 a.m., then sent a text message to his brother to inform him of the news. He cut down her body before the police arrived. Medics attempted to revive her, but it was already far too late. Police performed an autopsy to determine the cause of death, and from the start, speculations of foul play had arisen, but investigators were unable to find any other DNA at the scene besides Rebecca's. The San Diego Sheriff's Department formally announced their finding that Rebecca had committed suicide, but her family wasn't happy about that, and they were firm on their belief that she did not commit suicide. Family and friends looked at Adam Shackney, Jonah's brother, as a prime suspect, as he was alone in the house with Rebecca during her hanging, and it could have been a revenge killing for the accidental death of his nephew while he was under Rebecca's watch. For 7 years, Rebecca's sisters had to fight to make it known she didn't commit suicide, and eventually it paid off. In 2018, a jury in San Diego found Adam Shackney responsible for the hanging death of Rebecca after a month-long civil trial. Rebecca's family was awarded more than $5 million for loss of companionship. The 12-member jury found Shackney responsible for her death in a 9-3 vote. The majority agreed Adam touched Rebecca with intent to harm her before her death, and the touching caused her death. The court never awarded any punitive damages. Because this was a civil trial, Adam didn't face any criminal charges and cannot be sentenced to prison. Regardless of the civil suit, the findings by police allegedly pointed at Jonah and Adam being innocent and Rebecca's death being a suicide. But the biggest flaw in that would be the way in which Rebecca's body was found hanging, bound and gagged. It's not something somebody would do to themselves. Still, what really happened may never be known for sure.